Hey there! This is That News You Care About, a weekly video game news shows from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, August 16th, 2020, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey. How you doing, Trev?
Good. I don't know if you caught the episode that Cam and I did last week, but I basically dubbed him my Phoenix Sun, so I didn't
Oh,
even have to. I
okay.
didn't have to change your introduction all that
You didn't
much,
change
really.
anything, yeah. I appreciate that a lot. Okay, that's very good. This week, though, Cameron is not here. I am here instead. Sorry to all our listeners. But we get to talk about a nice triad of multi-billion, trillion-dollar companies fighting each other, Trev.
Yep,
Um,
that's
Tell us about that.
50% more than last week's multi-billion-dollar companies fighting
Right,
each
yeah.
other. Because as basically a follow-up to last week's stories about Apple versus Microsoft, Sweeney, it seems, was very enraged by all that stuff going on with Apple, and basically Fortnite picked a fight with Apple and then later with Google by basically subverting. I mean, the whole thing started because they basically went against the platform's financial transactions. Like they gave an option within the Fortnite app to buy V-Bucks directly, violating the terms of service from Apple's iOS and Google Play, and predictably, Apple kind of took the bait for it and basically said, "Okay, well, we're removing you from the App Store." And that was exactly what Fortnite wanted because Epic wanted, because they already had this in-game promo thing completely ready to go,
Wild.
that called 1980 Fortnite, and it is a very blatant riff on the famous Apple commercial from 1984, evoking imagery of the George Orwell 1984, and so it basically uh, uh, Epic responded with that both on their social media channels as well as within the game itself, Fortnite, and then they in turn sued Apple for basically monopolistic practices, in the fact that Apple requires basically takes a 30% cut from transactions from purchases made through the App Store, and then basically all that happened, and then in the footnotes, all the same stuff happened on Google's side too. They didn't have an ad ready to go attacking Google or whatever, but yeah, the 1980 Fortnite ended with basically Fortnite announcing that they had done this, and that Apple had removed them from the store, and that Fortnite was basically suing them over this 30%. It's I guess important to note, in the lawsuits, Epic is not suing for damages or anything like that. They're not looking for any. They're not seeking any kind of monetary compensation. They are basically trying to present themselves as doing this altruistically, on behalf of all of the other third-party developers that are having to pay Apple's 30%, Google's 30%. I basically said, when the suit first broke, my immediate response was, okay, well, if that's what they're going after, is the 30% cut that Apple is taking, what's to stop them from going after PlayStation for the 30% cut that the PSN takes, and or Xbox, or any other platform holder? What it'll be interesting to see the wide-reaching ramifications of these lawsuits. So, and that has continued to update. I guess today it looks like basically Apple is removing developer access from Epic and Fortnite developers. They are removing their developer accounts from the back end. So it's continually, and Fortnite is basically trying to kind of fight that now as well. So yeah, big old billion-dollar companies fighting each other, with Fortnite in particular trying to kind of do this thing that we've seen increasingly happen in recent years, of they're absolutely targeting their audience and trying to weaponize their audience against Apple. Analogs that we've seen recently are when Spider-Man, like the movie rights
That's
to
what I was
Spider-Man
gonna
blew up
mention.
between
Yep.
Disney and Sony last year, where like Disney kind of fired the first shot saying like, hey, we really want to keep having him, but Sony's not playing ball. Whereas like if you go into the details of that deal, it's like Disney was absolutely trying to lowball Sony and fuck them over, but Disney as like the proprietors of the MCU and the multi-billion-dollar Avengers Endgame that had just launched at that time, they're absolutely playing like hardball and that kind of stuff. So we've seen that. I remember like being enraged when I saw like Bethesda pulling this shit a couple years ago against Sony, because Bethesda would tout and say like, hey, we're going to bring mods to PlayStation, even though that was against PlayStation's like terms of service. And so when eventually they were like, hey, turns out we can't bring mods to PlayStation, they blamed PlayStation for not like playing with their mods instead of owning up the fact that, hey, we promised you a thing that we actually shouldn't have promised you. And Bethesda, like the combination of Bethesda doing that and Bethesda stopping or like ending the process of like advanced review copies of games, and then basically blaming or trying to like weaponize their audience against like your IGNs and your GameSpots and your outlets that could be reviewing those games, like just all that always leaves a sour taste in my mouth. So yeah, that's kind of the big story of this one, and my major takeaway here is like, fuck all these companies, we're all fucked anyway. Like no matter what happens, none of us win. Only one or more of these big billion-dollar companies wins.
Yeah, like it's interesting for me because you already touched on one of the big things, which is the kind of Disney, Sony back and forth over Spider-Man. I think the Bethesda Sony one's also a great example of like how yet again people on the internet are just so rapidly going to one side or the other. And like I've seen more people be pro Epic on at least in my timeline than pro Apple, but it is just absolutely baffling like people being so gung-ho to like come to like Epic's defense, and it's like, yo, like they're also gonna be all right at the end of the day. Like they're gonna be fine. Epic is not gonna suddenly crash and burn because of this suddenly being withdrawn from the App Store here, guys. And some absolutely wild takes that made me kind of like double take these kind of past few days, and it's interesting in particular because I at least thought, after the Disney Sony back and forth with Sony, kind of the whole controversy, and then like the controversy over that like people would recognize that maybe it's okay to be like, I like this thing that you do, but that doesn't mean I have to come to bat for, this corporation, especially when the corporation is Apple or Epic or Disney, who are going to be fine either way and don't necessarily need your, moral Twitter support. I think for me, I guess to start it out with is that Apple's probably doing monopolistic practices with the App Store and the 30% cut. Like, that's definitely, like, from that side of things, if you want to focus on that for a second, it's definitely probably monopolistic. Like, I've taken, 2 con law classes, and I can say, like, this is definitely, yeah.
I mean, the precedent that I imagine will be raised here, I remember it being like a big Channel 1 story when I was in middle school, which was when Microsoft got sued over like their insistence on including Internet Explorer on every like Windows platform. Like they basically got taken to task for the same kind of thing of like, this is, monopolistic, the fact that that was kind of being the target. Now, admittedly, that was during a less business-friendly, political environment, compared to like Republicans running the show, because that would have been during like the Bill Clinton years, where those kinds of regulations were actually being looked at and enforced, compared to like, nobody batting an eye when Disney buys Fox Entertainment or something like that. It's like, nope, this is Disney absolutely
buys everything, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like, it definitely has the potential to be targeted, and again, like if the case wins and Epic wins this case, it will have wide-reaching consequences that go far outside of this
way
Apple
beyond this.
Google thing.
Yes. I would also say too that if Epic's strategy is to, we're just going to rely on the courts and they'll resolve this in a timely manner and it'll be a few months and it won't be a big deal, that is a very mistaken and poor strategy to bank on. I mean, this is going to be a court case that I'm going to go ahead and say is going to be, I don't think it's ever going to be solved. I think there's just going to be a settlement within a few days or a few weeks probably. But B, if it were to go through the court system, this is going to take years. I mean, these are two giant corporations that each probably have lots of lawyers, and there are going to be just constant appeals and counter appeals. Like, I don't particularly think either side really wants this to go to any sort of actual, trial, because as you mentioned, the repercussions for it are far reaching well beyond just can Fortnite be on the App Store.
Based on kind of especially how Epic is presenting themselves and how Tim Sweeney is out there presenting himself, he seems to be very adamant that, like, Apple has gotten away with this for far too long. And again, like, if you go back to the stories surrounding the Apple versus Microsoft stuff from a week before all of this, like, Tim Sweeney from Epic was very vocal about that and basically very anti-Apple in all of that. And it's entirely possible that, like, all of this is spawning from that whole thing and his rebuff to that. So I could very easily see Tim Sweeney basically, like, using his controlling stake of Epic and saying, no, we are going to fight this and we are going to do it, on behalf of the little guy. Again, that's certainly the message they're putting forth.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are a ton of think pieces out there already, and I echo any of them that, like, no, you can promote yourself through the guise of altruism or whatever, but no, like, this all. You're doing this because it will affect your bottom line as well. Because you get more money out of this if you're not having to pay Apple 30%. And sure, it's good PR that you can go out there and say, we're not doing this for us. We're not hurting for money. We don't care. We want the little guys to also not have to pay Apple 30%. And if we just happen to make more money because of that, so be it. It's like, all right, but fuck you. Like you know exactly what you're doing.
It's interesting because, I don't know, part of me, I am really curious. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, Epic's strategy is, like, they just want more money, and it's really that simple. But, like, this is such an interesting way to go about it. I really feel like they've made this very, like, publicized feud now between them and Apple. And I don't know, like, I just feel like the strategy of taking this to court and banking on that, and, like, Tim Sweeney really, like, doing that kind of thing, it's just gonna, like, they won't see the dividends from that for so many years, and, like, the sunken cost into it on the hope that they win is, like, is it worth it over just talking to Apple and seeing what you could work out? Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're gonna lose a lot of money on the front end on this fight potentially, to maybe make it up on the back end. Or again, they could lose and they just lose a bunch of money and never get, like, and so it's a really ballsy, risky strategy in that regard. And again, I do think this is just going to be, like, settled and they're just going to, like, come to some sort of agreement out of court. But I don't know. I mean, like, Apple, their whole 30% cut in and of itself is, like, super inconsistent and not very well applied, which is also, to be fair, partially why I think that, like, if they are brought to court, that's a whole hell of a mess as well, because they're just inconsistent with their system. Like, Amazon Prime, for example, is one of the things that talked about in the article, is, like, totally fine. But, like, everything on, like, games on the app are not. It's still a 30% cut. And also just, like, a 30% cut is huge. But ultimately, my big question immediately is, when will people learn that you don't need to defend a corporation, if ever? Maybe that's just very naive of me to ever suggest something like that. but B, what do you kind of expect to be the next step in the next event for all kind of parties involved, Trev?
Well, on the like, hey, when are people going to figure out they don't need to defend corporations?
Never.
No, because people always pick sides. I mean, this is
Yep.
this is basically just the console wars 2.0 kind of like,
Yeah.
or 4.0, how whatever iteration of the console wars
15.0,
we're
yeah,
in at this point. That's what this is. It is the Disney versus Sony thing of last year again. So like people will always pick favorites and get into those fights just because that's human nature. People love picking those fights, and people love suddenly becoming experts in business and and the law and economy and all this stuff, as we see anytime these kinds of stories flare up. Case in point, we're talking about it as if we're experts on the matter or whatever. As far as next steps, I mean, like, I don't know, because like one of the things that we haven't really touched on that Epic has going for it themselves in this case is the idea that they run their own thing. They run their own platform through the Epic Game Store, and have already been making moves and trying to push down against Steam's 30% cut by just working in that marketplace and saying, hey, we're gonna not charge 30%. We're gonna, I don't remember what the percentage is at this point, like 12 or 15 or 18% or something like that. It's like whatever it is, they're undercutting Steam and giving more money to the developers who are publishing on their platform. At the same time, they spent a good portion of last year gobbling up as many like exclusivity deals and stuff as they could. So that's where you'll get more and more people going into the anti-consumer arguments or whatever. I honestly could see Epic not settling and pushing this through, and this they're especially because they're putting it through in California, which is a democratic, largely democratically leaning kind of court system. So they could absolutely side on the side of Epic here against Apple and basically like bring the case against Apple that it is being monopolistic and needs to restructure how this business is done. And then you could end up seeing this go all the way to the Supreme Court, and I'm sure Trump it wouldn't happen hopefully in a Trump timeline, knock on wood.
Sure.
But like I could easily see kind of it will still be a largely Trump and conservative driven court if this goes to the Supreme Court in the next couple of years. So who knows, where that would end up falling. Again, I go back to like that case from the Microsoft case from the 90s does probably establish a pretty good precedent for this kind of issue that Congress is notoriously like behind the times in really legislating against tech. And I think this would be another kind of milestone case where it could finally start catching up to the tech industry, as we've seen. Just all of this has gotten to kind of run free reign for the last 15, 20 years, and it would be interesting to see how things shake out if this were actually go to court. Because I mean, based on my incredibly limited knowledge, but also looking and seeing like the people who actually do study law, like I haven't seen any lawyers come out and be like, Epic doesn't have a case here. No,
I mean they definitely have a case.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be very clear about that. Yeah.
So it is, as you already touched on, like the backroom deals that Apple has already made for certain platforms like Amazon absolutely hurt their side of this argument, because they aren't enforcing their 30% policy unilaterally across the platform. So Epic couldn't come in and say, well, if they didn't have to pay, why should we? Why should anybody have to pay if they're going to allow it? Other organizations to get these these deals and these exceptions to the rules. So and Epic they have the resources that they absolutely could do this. And so yeah, they have the resources to do this. And I think based on, how vocal and how active Tim Sweeney is being, including in response to like opinion pieces that are saying like what he's doing and what Fortnite is doing and what Epic is doing are kind of bullshit. Like him coming out there and like him responding to like IGN saying, you know, we're weaponizing our audience, but we're only cementing, or we're only putting forth this idea, blah blah blah, and like he's absolutely propagandizing it. So I could absolutely see him again taking his, you know, 51% control of Epic and saying, no, we're doing this, we're fighting this fight, and you know, scorch the earth around us. Who cares? So that's honestly, that's probably what I don't see it settling out of court. I see it, you know, moving forward, and especially because like if they were to back down right now, like that would launch 1,000 other think pieces of like, well, what was the point? If you said you were doing this for, you know, for the little guy, and you back down and you settle out of court here, you know, how are you helping the little guy by doing that? So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. But I think they could, you know, hold out the fight, and yeah, we'll see this argued against the Supreme Court in a couple of years.
And that's I guess those are kind of my two final thoughts. Is that while it's possible that that they've argued all the way to Supreme Court, the reason why, like the counter of like why they wouldn't, and it would just be the lawyer at one of the lawyers at Epic being like, well, because we can lose Tim. Like that's why you would settle out of court. Like the offer they're making is, you know, good enough, whatever. But also the second point, which is maybe the most important point that I kind of briefly touched on earlier, is that like Apple is unquestionably engaged in monopolistic practices. This is just an example of it. But they're like, again, when like the four heads of, what was it, Apple, Google, Facebook, and I can't remember the other one that were all on Capitol Hill like a week or two ago. Like Apple is like one of the prime examples of like they're unquestionably engaging in monopolistic practices. Like they're unabashed about it. Like this is what they're doing. They're just like the epitome of like, well, they're just too big. So it would be an amazingly ironic like legal note if the company that brings Apple to task that like breaks up the Apple monopoly is Epic because of Fortnite. If Fortnite breaks up Apple, that would be a win for gamers everywhere, I guess, and certainly a really bizarre law class coming in the future if the potential ramifications of that suit. But changing from Apple and Epic and Google and these big giant monoliths of tech, we shift to the humble character. You might know him, Mr. Bruce Wayne, Batman.
Another billionaire.
Exactly right. WB Montreal is going about the world's longest PRTs of all time. They first started teasing this game 328 days ago. They still have not revealed it. Hopefully this week that changes.
So
fingers.
So you pulled that. You pulled that off of Jason Schreier's tweet, right? Of 328 days. Because if you, Imran Khan like basically quote tweeted, it was like that's when their marketing team started teasing it, but like the staff at WB Montreal started teasing it 690 days ago or something like that, when they started wearing shirts that had kind of the Court of Owls logo behind it or something.
So this is either a year or 2 year long tease of this game, and we are hopefully finally going to get revealed this week. It seems to be a Court of Owls game. Really, the two big questions I think that are immediately up for discussion are, what is this PRTs, and the almost certain delay in the game that has resulted in it, but also just they're sticking with this same tease. A, and B, what do we think of a Batman Court of Owls game? We'll take both those points, Trev.
So I mean, since they've been teasing the Court of Owls thing, I have the Court of Owls like storyline. I picked that up when I got into comics back when I was doing my daily vlogs with Trevor Trove. One of my features there was like, hey, weekly I will talk about comics or anime or something like that. So I picked it up as like one of the things to look at then. I never actually got around to reading it, so I have not but it's
still surprised.
I will still be surprised by Court of Owls. and I still have time, because I can't imagine even when this gets announced, this week at Fandom or whatever, I can't imagine it's going to be like immediately coming out.
Coming out that day.
Like that one seems to, based on like the rumors and stuff, seems to be closer than the Suicide Squad that Rocksteady finally kind of started teasing. As for like why this tease has happened so long, I gotta believe that it is, largely tied to just the constant flux of DC's success in the public space, as well as like, just game development in general. Like the rumors, the rumors seem to be that Montreal was probably working on the Suicide Squad game first. Like they were working on their Suicide Squad game, and then the movie came out, and everybody was like, "This is terrible." Okay, well, we need to not focus on a Suicide Squad game now, and so they kind of moved away from that project and probably onto this Court of Owls one. And so it's just taken a while to like transition over into that, and then Rocksteady, it sounds like, picked up the mantle on a Suicide Squad game, and is finally at a point where they're ready to at least show and tease it. So yeah, as far as like the Court of Owls thing, I just imagine it is probably like okay, well, we're developing, but it's also we're developing at the end of the console cycle. So are we gonna keep this on current stuff? Or are we going to try and design this for the next generation? What does that all lead to? I'm not too familiar with WB Montreal's like teams. They might have had some kind of leadership changes in the last couple of years that probably would have, shaken some things up, as we've seen with like even, Halo's recent delay or whatever. Creative director leaving that a year ago is, having some ripple effects. So it's like, I think a lot of it just comes up to just bad timing, but everybody's constantly been asking, since the last Arkham game that we got was basically Arkham VR, in 2016.
The last full Arkham game was what?
Was Arkham Knight 2015, I think, right?
15, right? 14, 15, yeah.
So yeah, it's like clearly been some time, and so it like there's definitely something going on with WB. Also, we talked a few weeks
100%.
ago with or a couple months ago, I guess now, the idea that WB was flirting with the idea of like selling off their games divisions and what that would mean for Arkham or the Harry Potter game that's clearly in development and has been for the longest time. So if there's just constant kind of like will they, won't they on a lot of those things, that probably has affected the development cycles and how invested they're getting in some of these projects. And when they just kind of say something's not working here, let's scrap it and figure out a new approach.
I have to believe, that it is what you're saying, that it is just delays and the weird flux and like team turmoil and DC's like stock just like up and down, because if this is just like they one day were like, what if we just do a 2-year long PRTs and certain like all stuff, it's like it's such a bizarre, like to come what we think is like the end of like this tease and looking at it in like its totality, it is such a bizarre, not great done tease of this game. Like I feel like once it had been delayed or pushed off, like I would probably have tried to do something different. I don't know if I would have kept up with the same tease necessarily and the symbols and everything the way they were doing. Because it just every time I'm like, oh right, this is like a thing that they're doing again, and it's like, oh right, this is a thing that like I just completely forget it because it's just so far between teases. But I don't know. Like I'm also really curious. Even more so if it is like WB was doing the Suicide Squad game and then it got bounced over to Rocksteady and then they're doing this Court of Owls game, how people are also going to receive WB's game, right? Because I think it's fair to say they've kind of been a bit more the redheaded stepchild in the games they've done within this kind of universe. Like Batman Arkham Origins, I think, is a good game, while still also probably being my least favorite of the kind of the Arkham games, but I am also kind of curious about the fan reception, if maybe kind of attitudes have changed on WB, if people are just hungry for anything, they don't even care, if it's also just been long enough, right? Because to your point, I would say it's pretty unlikely this game comes out this year, so we're looking at a 2021 release, in which case it will have been 6 years since the last Arkham game. So I think people could also just be kind of ready to dive in to play as Batman any way they can. I really just, and like I almost want to have a whole like post DC fandom wrap up, and we might have it as a topic next week, just like everything that they're doing I'm just really curious about, and like maybe slightly more positive than I am like skeptical, but like I am very skeptical about what they're doing about the Suicide Squad game. I'm skeptical on the Court of Owls game. I have a lot of questions on. Like these are like the decisions they've made after this long of time. I'm like, I don't know if this is what I would have done after 5 or 6 or 7 years for these kind of games, because they can be trickier to nail, right? And like especially like the initial pitch on what that Suicide Squad game is going to be, I think has the potential to be underwhelming for what people have wanted Rocksteady to do after 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, there was. I will point out a couple things. One, obviously, COVID also threw a whole bunch of stuff for a loop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm pretty sure back before everything started getting canceled, there were already rumors that WB was going to have their own conference at E3.
Yes.
So they probably would have shown these. The Batman games, they probably would have shown something from Harry Potter. Obviously, that all got thrown for a loop. So, and then a million other shows basically tried to spring forth from the carcass of E3 there. And so, and as it is, like fandom, I remember hearing about like 2 months ago, and every week when I hear something about it, I'm like, that still hasn't happened. Holy hell! Like it even that has been like overly teased. But also, just talking about this is reminding me that I think, in a weird way, maybe they have learned from Arkham Knight. Because if you remember, like, they revealed Arkham Knight and gave it a date, and then, like, a month later, they delayed it, like, 9 months or something like that. And it was like, you clearly knew, you had to have known when you revealed it to the world and started collecting pre-orders that the date you were putting on it wasn't the real date, given just how quickly they turned around and were like, actually, we're going to need more time on this.
It
and that much more time or whatever. Because originally it was like, hey, yeah, it's it's going to come out, this fall or something like that. And then like 2 or 3 months later, it was like, actually, we're going to push it to next year. Sorry. So like, I definitely think that's probably a factor. And I think that's probably been a part of like, I think when they started teasing it, they may have thought they were on a better timeline, and then something came up and they were like, okay, well, yeah, we teased this, but looking at it more closely and looking at like realistic timelines and stuff, we probably don't want to do that again, because people will take us to task, and they will eat our lunch over that kind of thing. So they put out the tease, and then they back away from it and go silent for long periods of time. And then, like 3 months go by or something, they put out a new tease because maybe they're about ready to show something, and then fucking the world, ends with COVID or whatever. So it's like, who would have seen that coming? Obviously, like, it's one of those things that, like, Rocksteady has had to come out ahead of, like, the Game Awards or E3 the last couple of years and basically say, hey, our new game isn't going to be there. Sorry. And I'm sure they wish it would. They wish they could go out there and say, yep, we look forward to showing you what we're going to do on the Xbox stage, or whatever that case is. And they just, I think they were playing it a little more safe than, and maybe trying to gun for that kind of, like, maybe they're trying to gun for like the Fallout 4 approach of like, let's, It's the worst kept secret. Of course, we're working on these games, but we're not ready to officially announce something until we want this to be a shorter cycle, a shorter marketing cycle. We'll announce it, and you can play it in 4 months' time or something like that, rather than the drawn out kind of stuff we've seen in the past. So I think all of the above have probably played a role in what's been going on here. And so yeah, it's interesting now that finally we're gonna get to see something from them. I imagine all we're really gonna get probably is like a trailer, maybe a little bit of gameplay on the WB Montreal one. I think Suicide Squad is probably like much further out. We might get a little something from that, but I can't imagine. Like even on that one though, I do like I hearkened back to, again going back to like 2015. I referenced when that news came out. There had been a deep dive profile on Nolan North as Uncharted 4 was coming out. Because he was basically being like, I've played this character for 10 years. My career changed immensely because of it, and I've gotten so many other opportunities. And in that article with I don't remember who it was, like The Verge or some entertainment site. It was more on that side of things. But he talked about how he had pretty much just like signed a deal with WB that was going to take another 10 years, and he was basically going to be working on that, because this was also around the time that he had replaced Dinklebot and stuff. So like he had these very long-term projects that were going to be coming on, and the WB Games one, everybody was like, is he going to be playing Superman? And so maybe he is, and maybe that's what like he's being introduced into the Arkham verse or whatever through Suicide Squad. Kill the Justice League, it looks like is what they're going with, either the full name or at least the tagline. And maybe that turns into a proper Justice League game as the follow-up or something like that. Who knows? But it's just interesting to see and really put into perspective sometimes how long that cycle of development takes, if this ends up being tied to that profile from 5 years ago. Because I want to say that was like early 2015 or something when that piece came out. And I went back and looked it up, because I remember thinking at the time, oh, that'd be really cool as like let's build off of the Arkham games and expand it out into and make a Superman game that isn't just Superman 64, and see what we can do with that. So, but yeah, then development happens and throws everything for a loop. Yep.
Yeah, ultimately, I think we might have a topic next week after DC Fan. I'm really curious to see what everything looks like. It's just, yeah, like you said, the world's been kind of spinning. Video games are hard to make. It's all these things. And they probably did want to not get too far ahead of it. Either way, I would say this is not going to be a textbook example of how to roll out a PR campaign in the future. I'm also curious, though, because ultimately at the end of the day, people won't remember this really at all if the game is great or even fine.
It's really even that, like most people are like, whatever. Like most people would have gotten to fandom and not thought about the idea that this is a game that has been potentially teased for over a year or 2 years or something like that. The people that are thinking about that are your Barrett Courtneys, who have just been like so invested in this because Arkham City's his favorite game of all time, kind of thing.
Arkham City's fantastic.
That he's any hint of that, he is all over and doing all sorts of analysis. But yeah, like the fact that I woke up and it's like, oh, there's a Morse code tease about this game on Twitter. I was like, okay, whatever. I don't care about the marketing hype build up for this. I very much fall under, at this point, from the school of thought that our friend Jarrett Green always proposes of, like, no gameplay, no hype. Like, you can put all the CG trailers or whatever you want behind it, but if I don't get a sense of what this game is actually going to be, then I'm not going to really care too much at the end of the day.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts on this story, Trev?
Not on this one. I mean, like, one of the things that I am thinking that is like another one of those like long rumored thoughts that's percolating in the back of my brain that also somehow may have impacted this is one of the rumors had been that the Nemesis system from the Shadow of Mordor games, Shadow of War games, was going to be like implemented, and that's how they were gonna, maybe they would take that over into the Batman games, or maybe also into the Harry Potter games. Just like that's such a good system to be used that it shouldn't be like confined there into to the Lord of the Rings kind of territory. But Shadow of War got into such like there was such like controversy around how the loot boxes of that game like affected the nemesis system in the second one, that maybe they had to like take some of that back to the drawing board too, and maybe that was like they were like building on that, and then saw that like people were backing away from Shadow of War because of that, and said, well, okay, we got to figure out a new structure, a new way of implementing this in the Batman mythos, that won't piss people off in that. Like the rise and fall of loot boxes over the last few years, I think, in maybe they've tried to figure out, okay, let's make a season pass model work for this game or something like that. Who knows? But then also I think I've been hearing rumors that that Rocksteady is looking to like that one of these games, be it Rocksteady's or WB Games, is looking at doing more of a Destiny kind of like game as service kind of vibe, which also would be a drastic departure from the Arkham games, at least. So what is that gonna how do you find the balance of that, and not leave people underwhelmed like it seems Avengers has been doing, kind of since it was revealed that it was going to be a Destiny like, making sure. So like when you're working head down on a game like that, and then you peek your head out and see something like Anthem crash and burn, and you see reception around Avengers. Well, like I enjoyed my time with the beta and stuff. Like I also get people thinking it's really basic and really boring. Like I don't really argue with them. I think Destiny can be that as well, but like the gunplay of Destiny can be really fun as well. That helps tide you over. So if you're like head down on Gotham Knights or whatever the games are, Court of Owls, whatever they're calling the games, and then you peek your head out and you see, oh, looks like the industry's changed. Do you dig in further, or do you try and adjust, and maybe in those adjustments delays happen, and that's why the marketing cycles slip and everything. So that's like all of those things are kind of percolating around this game in particular, and it'll be a very fascinating thing when in Blood, Sweat, and Pixels 2, Jason Schreier's out there being like, here's what was really going on with the Court of Owls thing and why it took so long. Here's just what was happening at Rocksteady, at WB Games, because I'm like he definitely seems to know more than he like is out there kind of like reporting on, just based on like the tweets he'll throw out there every now and then. So I got to imagine he has sources that when he can tell that story, he'll tell that story.
I agree. I'm very excited to hear all of the different stories of what is going on with these games. But that's it. We're going to shoutouts. I don't know if you have a shout out. I have a shout out. I think I have 2 shout outs, but I'll only do one. I won't go crazy here.
Okay.
Because they're both huge. And also because I'm cheating and it's like 10 shout outs. Over at Polygon, every now and again they do these things. Well, basically they'll pick a movie or a show or something and do like a series of features about this one topic in celebration of it. I remember back when we were doing Input, they did one over The Dark Knight on the 10th anniversary of it, and they had a lot of great kind of content over that film and its impact. And this time, Polygon is doing one over Pirates of the Caribbean, and it's wonderful. It's great. There are a bunch of different great ones. I want to give a personal shout out to Pirates of the Caribbean is the ultimate girlhood fantasy, and also to what happens when a character gets too popular, and finally to Davy Jones is my biggest crush, a blog from a 13-year-old me. But it is just a series of kind of reflections, thoughts, kind of critiques of the Pirates of the Caribbean series, all 5 films that are now 17-year-old series. It's very good, and I think it's cool to look at these kind of things a decade or so later and kind of reflect on all the different angles, all the different impacts, all the different people that kind of went into these things and loved these things, who didn't love these things, and all the reasons why. And yeah, Pirates of the Caribbean is great. I just watched it again a few months back. That movie, the first one at the very least, very much still holds up, is fantastic, and it is always fun to remember that Johnny Depp was nominated for an Academy Award for Jack Sparrow.
Yep.
And so it is, and to be fair, again, watching the first Pirates of the Caribbean film, it is a great performance. It's very much like the kind of role that gets nominated for supporting actor or actress, and it is a ton of fun. He owns every single second of the film he's in, and also then a few months later to now, reading the article of like what happens when a character gets too popular, it all rang very, very true of like, this is the downside of that. But yeah, it is great. It's a great series of articles. I believe they're still updating. They'll still have a few more over this week, but yeah, it's great. And so shout out to Pirates of the Caribbean, shout out to Polygon for that.
Pirates Gone of the Caribbean is what they've grouped all those stories under that I was looking at. Yeah.
Yes. I do want to give a quick shout. I'm not going to give it like a full thing too, because it's massive, and I'm not a particularly massive fan of the franchise, and I don't believe you are either. But Polygon also does every now and again like oral histories of games usually or movies, and they have one over the original Street Fighter, I believe, and it is also a very good read that I urge everybody who is a fan of long form stories to check out as well.
Yeah, the first Street Fighter is always like that's like the forgotten one, because like yes. I mean like it definitely rose to like insane popularity with Street Fighter 2, and like I played a ton of Street Fighter 2 back in the day. Back on the SNES, and it was one of the few games when I was like starved for content, I guess, in the at the beginning of the PS4's life cycle, that I was just thinking about like, yeah, I picked up Street Fighter 5 and tried to hop in. Did not go well. It did not did not make it through too many fights before I was like, all right, screw this, I'm going to play Black Flag instead. But yeah, it's definitely like a series that away from the fighting like scene can admire from a distance and be like, good for them for like making that work as long as they have and as well as they have, and also doing weird like exclusivity things. Like I remember when they announced Street Fighter 5 at the first PSX. Admittedly, it had already been like leaked or whatever, because Capcom always has leaks, especially at like PSX events. But like them saying like Street Fighter 5 will only ever be on PlayStation was like insane off of the heels of Street Fighter 4 and how well it had been doing in the fighting game scene. And so it was just like one of those things of like, okay, yeah, they can say that, but like, you know, Super Street Fighter 5 or Street Fighter 5 Ultra or whatever the case may be will eventually be like multi-platform. And they were like, and they ended up coming out and being like, no, like this generation of Street Fighter is only going to be PlayStation, on PlayStation. So yeah, weird Street Fighter. Yeah, but I am absolutely not like the expert on it. It's just like tangentially, it's fascinating to look at and see.
Yes, 100%.
Shout out for me, kind of again building off of our main story of today of the Epic versus the other billion-dollar companies. I did want to highlight a piece that Imran Khan did over at IGN, titled "Opinion: Epic is weaponizing Fortnite fans against Apple and Google," and it's basically like a lot of the same kind of points we hit on of like, hey, yeah, it's kind of like bullshit that they're exploiting this specifically because Fortnite's audience is such a young skewing audience. And Rebecca Valentine also has an opinion piece that I'll give a little shout out to as well, kind of touching on a lot of the same topics. Specifically, hers is titled "Epic's 1980 Fortnite video is an irresponsible piece of corporate propaganda." Because like, if you think about like, the 1984 ad predates me, and I'm 35, and have been a lifelong gamer. I certainly know the ad because it has been parodied to death in pop culture and stuff, and it is one of the most famous marketing ads of all time. But it like most of the people who are playing Fortnite have no idea what it is, what the context of it is, what the context of like 1984 is versus like the ad versus Fortnite now doing their take on the ad. It's just like there's so many layers of that like, yeah, some of us can like dig into and do the analysis on, but like 99% of the people who are seeing it aren't going to do that. And they're not going to understand what it's saying. It's just like it ends up being more Orwellian than it's trying to be, because people don't get the context that it's trying to be a riff on Orwell, or that's trying to be a parody of Orwell, and so it just ends up coming across as Orwell. So shout out to both Imran and Rebecca for their articles on the topic as well.
Yes. But with that, that's the show, guys. Thank you for listening. You can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Like all of our wonderful patrons have, we thank you all for your support. It keeps the lights on and makes shows like this happen, and we very much appreciate that and are very, very thankful for that. As we kind of cross over 9.5 months of That Nerdy, we should probably begin to look forward for what year 2 of the site looks like, but it'll be very exciting, I can assure you of that. So please go over and support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, share with all of your friends, and go rate and review us over on iTunes. It really does help, especially for newer shows like this, and it would mean the world to me, and Trevor will personally send you hugs. Virtually.
No, I won't.
Virtually.
I won't.
Christian Puente will bake you something.
I mean,
send it to you.
He's not even affiliated with us anymore, so no, he definitely won't.
You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, go check out my ranking of all the Fall Guys minigames.
Yes.
As I continue to try and chase after that final infallible trophy to get the platinum in that game. I also sat down and was like, I've been playing enough of this. I've got enough wins that I have thoughts on which of these games are like really good and which of these suck, and also some potential tips. So you can go check out my ranking of all 25 minigames in Fall Guys, as well as get some hopefully helpful tips on how to pick up your first crowns if you haven't.
You can go find me at Lefty Logie. I am also going to echo Trev. That's a really good, fun piece that I recommend everybody check out. I also will give a shout out to me and Trevor's conversation that went live today as of recording, yesterday when you listened to this, of That Nerdy Site show. I thought it was a really good conversation. You can hear my thoughts on the Alto collection. You can hear my thoughts on Dora the Explorer, the movie. It's very good. And it was just a really fun conversation. So I go urge everyone to check that out. Also, you should go check out Trevor's Twitter, where he has a tweet of him being the only person to finish a slime climb level and winning because of it, because it's genuinely impressive to watch, but also because it is just another great example of how amazingly mad that level is. I love it. You can go check out That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site on all kinds of platforms across the internet. Thank you all for listening. Play your games and be good to each other.